Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We have more than 100 participants all around the world, and I would like to thank all of you for attending today. I'm Laurent-Olivier Coudeyre, Chair of the WNA Working Group Supply Chain, and it's a pleasure for me to moderate the discussion today. Kaser from WNA Secretariat, responsible for the working group Supply Chain, will co-host with me. WNA is holding this launch event on the publication of its report, the World Nuclear Supply Chain Outlook 2040. And we have a great panel with us to support the discussion and introduce it. Elina Tepinski, partner at Pillsbury Law. Oliver Martin, project leader, European Commission Joint Research Center. Jonathan Hinze, president, UXC. Simon Emeny, director, Low Carbon Assurance Services, Lloyd Register. Leonid Lechford, head of quality management, Rosatom Corporation, and PKP, senior expert at IAEA. Thanks to all of you for your participation. The panel discussion will address following topics: WNA scenarios for nuclear development, challenges and opportunities facing the nuclear supply chain, what is changing for the supply chain, role of government in shaping markets. In addition, you participants will have the opportunity to ask questions through the chat. So please feel free to ask any questions on the chat, and Greg will select some of them that will be answered by the panel. So we will have 2 sequences of questions that we will take to be answered by the panel. But let's start with the report, and Greg will introduce it.
Thank you very much, Laurent-Olivier. It's great to be here, and we've got a really good turnout, as you can see. I'm trying to get to the next slide. Here we are, good. The World Nuclear Supply Chain has been published over a number of years now. We're on our 4th edition, and you know, every one has become a little bit more detailed in terms of the coverage of where the supply chain is at. So we're trying to do several things with this report. We're trying to map the supply chain, but also to explain some of the trends that are going on in the industry. Some of these trends are in terms of the business environment, and others in terms of some of the things we can do in terms of quality and so on. Now, we are in uncertain times. COVID-19, of course, has changed a lot of our lives around the world. But also we have climate change challenges ahead, which we need to address as a society and as a human race, really. Now, for example, travel restrictions have been hitting oil and aviation. The oil price, once upon a time, not so long ago, was around $90 a barrel, fell straight down to 25 in the early days of the pandemic, now come back up to 40. And we're seeing that sort of variation in price, and indeed in very low prices, compared to what is needed by the industry to replace the capital investment at a regular interval or to expand production. So that's the story in oil, and it's equally a story in electricity. We've seen low gas prices, influencing the electricity price that nuclear producers can obtain from selling the electricity into the grid. And as a result of that, there has been a number of announcements made to close some reactors, particularly in the United States, where it's no longer considered economic to carry on purely commercial grounds. And consumer behavior is changing. I mean, you know, my neighbors are now investing in electric cars, and you know, they've got a greater demand of electricity is coming through the system, and we've got to address that, but also to address the need to make sure that that electricity is generated in a way that's not producing greenhouse gases. At the same time, investors are very worried. In many cases, they're looking for safe havens to put their money, and certainly whether one thinks nuclear energy is a safe haven, one of the things the report is trying to suggest is that even though it doesn't look like a good prospect to many people at the moment, it's actually a really good insurance policy for the society if we're going to tackle climate change correctly. And not only that, of course, we have tensions in international trade, and some of these issues are picked up in the report. I want to first of all say that you know, we can look at some indices here as to what the industry is doing. The American Society of Mechanical Engineers, as you know, many of you, certifies nuclear production at quality and what actually is produced. They have special standards for this. And we've seen a diminution over the last few years of the number of companies that are maintaining their certificates for nuclear-related standards. Now, ASME certificates are not the only way nuclear energy components and systems are constructed to. So this is a partial picture, and certainly we've seen new suppliers coming in, particularly in China, where they've maintained production of nuclear power and expanding it on a consistent basis. But it is a worrying trend nonetheless. Things are not great in a lot of the industry. And many of the companies are also working in the oil and gas industry or in other sectors where there's high quality required. And if we see a problem in the oil industry, we're going to see, you know, further knock-on effects possibly in the nuclear supply chain also. As you may know, the World Nuclear Association produces scenarios every couple of years in its fuel report. And what we see is normally three scenarios projecting equally plausible futures. Now, clearly, the 2020s are going to be more foreseeable than the 2030s, and even, of course, past the 2040s. What I would say is that with the COVID crisis now, and then with climate change, we could see a real change coming along in the 2030s. We could see a switch from one of those pathways, because, to be honest, if we just stay with nuclear energy producing what we're currently producing, we're not going to be solving the climate change challenge. So we've got to do something, and the upper scenario, although it doesn't look terribly plausible at the moment, we need to bear in mind that it could be quite plausible by the time we get into the 2030s. There could be a switch. So that's something very important to think about. Now, this graph shows you capacity, electricity capacity in gigawatts, but what I have done in the supply chain report is translate that into money. So this is in capital expenditure up to 2040. What we can see here is that under the middle of the road reference scenario, we're coming up to nearly $1 trillion accumulative investment in new nuclear projects foreseen up to 2040. That is substantially higher in the upper case, the upper scenario, at 1.7 trillion approximately. And out of that, if you divide it into domestic projects and international projects, by international projects, I mean, you know, where, let's say, Rosatom is building a plant in Egypt, or China is building a plant in Great Britain. Those I count as international projects, and they're much more open to international procurement as well. So out of the international procurement for equipment, and of course the capital investment covers more than just equipment, it covers the construction, the site works and so on, as much as anything else. But out of that proportion that's going on equipment, out of international projects subject to international procurement, that could be around $288 billion cumulative to 2040. It's a substantial market in the upper scenario. How does it all add up? Well, it comes to probably around 20 to 25 billion dollars a year spent if it was done on average equally every year, which of course it will vary. As you can see here, we can build it up from long-term operation investment to try and make the reactors last a lot longer. There's also the expenditure on dismantling reactors that have been shut down and decommissioned. So that comes to a substantial amount a year, and you know we're talking you know up to $2 trillion in you know if we're just looking at the uppercase, and something like $1.5 trillion if you're just looking at the reference case. So we've got those figures in the report. We also discuss some other subjects like how we are trying to ensure high quality at competitive cost in the industry. And we've got a question on this to follow up later. So I won't say too much about it, but you know, we have a new international standard produced by the International Organization for Standardization that is directed for nuclear suppliers to try and explain what we can do there to make it easier for suppliers to move into the nuclear industry. But we'll also want to make greater use in the industry of other top quality industrial standards, such as those being used by the oil industry, for example. So just to sum up, the investment needed in nuclear energy will contribute to a cleaner energy system. It also could create jobs. We've done work in World Nuclear Association to show that over a lifetime of a nuclear plant compared to a similar lifetime for wind farms, we're getting just as many jobs out of nuclear, if not more than wind. It also offers opportunities to highly skilled workers who are being displaced from other industries, but if there is a substantial phase out of fossil fuel jobs. These are by and large well-paying and you know requiring a good qualifications to take them up. So nuclear energy permits the society to continue really with what we expect from our energy system. We expect to be able to switch the light on and it comes on. We expect to be able to start our car in the morning and drive off. You know, the energy system provides us with convenience. And if we're honest about things, the big challenge is how do we continue with that convenience and yet have reduced global greenhouse gas emissions. So that's the sum of the subjects we cover in the report, and I'll throw the discussion now open to everyone on the panel, and we've got some questions lined up.
Download the report now on the website from WNA. Thanks a lot. Maybe yes, we can continue the discussion with our panel that participate to the production also of the report. So maybe I will start with the first questions and to Jonathan. As we just saw, the supply chain report used the latest set of scenarios to generate projection of capital expenditure for new builds. The projections of capital expenditure over the 20 years to 2040 range from $972 billion in the reference scenario to 1.7 trillion in the upper scenario. About half of the investment will consist in equipment purchase, and the rest is accounted for by on-site construction and project management. Are these projections in the right order of magnitude? Will they be sufficient in the context of climate change? Please, Jonathan.
Thank you, Laurent-Olivier. And Greg, thank you for inviting me as well. Before I start answering your question, I wanted to congratulate you on this new report. I know how hard it is to put a big report like this out. It's an impressive achievement, so well done. I've read it very thoroughly with interest, and I find a lot of interesting and useful information in there. So I think it does a lot to advance this industry's understanding and issues that we need to deal with to make the nuclear industry successful going forward. As to your question, you know, I've done similar analyses of global market size and where the sort of trends go. Obviously, when you do these kinds of analyses, the most important factor is the amount of nuclear power every year. So it's not just the existing fleet of nuclear plants, but how many are built each year, the regions and locations, since costs can vary quite a bit. You know, obviously the Chinese, Russia has figured out ways to build nuclear plants with well, arguably more efficiently and cheaper at lower costs. So certainly the capital expenditures required to build a nuclear plant in China differ with those in the United States or Europe or some other markets. But I think the order of magnitude you asked analysis is in the ballpark for sure. It's always a tricky thing to forecast these large markets. I would almost say they may be slightly on the low side, just given where we've seen historical costs for new builds. I think that obviously it's also a cumulative question. So if you're only looking in the next 10 years, you know, we have a little better insight into how many plants might be built in 10 years. The period 2030 to 2040 is a bigger range of possibilities. And of course, future costs are also harder to predict. Are we going to have more standardization in designs, which helps to usually reduce costs, those types of things. So I think that we will see the market continue to actually expand for capital expenditures, because you're not just talking about new builds in this you're also talking about a lot of expenditures to maintain and upgrade existing plants. And that is an area where I know, Laurent-Olivier, your company is expending billions of dollars, EDF, in renewing the fleet of reactors in France, for example. US market, similarly, there's always billions of dollars being spent on the 90 plus reactors in the country where I am. So it is a lot of money that you have to realize is being spent globally. Is it enough to move nuclear forward at a pace that gets it to hitting those climate change goals? I would say your upper scenario that's in the report gets much closer, of course. But again, I've done an analysis which has been published by the Nuclear Energy Institute here in the US, where we analyzed the IPCC 2050 targets for keeping global temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And to meet the sort of median level of nuclear power that the IPCC report's consensus shows is even higher. Obviously, it's out to 2050, but we analyzed that you would have to spend maybe double or triple what your analysis shows for nuclear expenditures, just to get to a level of nuclear investment that matches the actual needs of the climate change challenge, the carbon emissions reduction challenge. So I think the point is there's a lot of money that's going to have to be spent globally, not just in nuclear, of course, renewables, hydropower, all the non-emitting sources. But this is a message for policymakers that if if you look at where the trends are, if you make the right investments today, you will get to those targets. You will meet those targets, but there's a lot of money, and the markets obviously need to be conducive to allow that money to be allocated in the right way. So I'll stop there, but again, congratulations on this excellent report.
Thank you, Jonathan, for this analysis. Maybe does someone want to add a further point to this?
I would be happy to make an additional point, Laurent-Olivier. I fully agree with everything that Jonathan said. I do think as we look forward, we need to look back a little bit in the past decade and see, what has shaped the growth of the industry and what have been some of the challenges. And I think we've had two challenges in the past decade. One is that we've had a number of designs that were fairly new, whether they were revolutionary or evolutionary. There were designs that had never been built before. And we went through some growing pains in a number of countries in building these designs, this first of a kind designs for the very first time. And also, especially in the West, having to almost regenerate the supply chain, especially in the construction side. At the same time, we also had the challenges post-Fukushima, when a number of countries either decided not to pursue nuclear new build or decided to slow down the new build, in order to address some of the concerns post-Fukushima. So what my outlook is that we've now gotten past these issues. We now have new designs that they're now becoming more of an nth of a kind rather than first of a kind, including in the West. And of course, as Jonathan mentioned, Chinese companies and Russian companies have been able to repeat their construction successes in a number of markets. And in addition to that, we have a number of governments. One really great example is Poland, that are looking to move away from fossil fuels, coal specifically, and are looking to nuclear new builds. So I think that really has the potential to increase the number of gigawatts that we'll see with nuclear and increase the potential for supply chain. Thanks.
Thank you, Elina, for this additional point. Maybe one further question for you concerning SMR. So what about the market for small modular reactor?
That's a great question. So I think there is this potential for the SMR market that's really significant, both for light water reactor SMRs and generation 4 reactors, whether it's high temperature gas, sodium cooled, molten salt, lead cooled reactors, fast reactors. When we look at the LWR SMRs, we already have some great progress. So Rosatom's floating nuclear power plant, Academic Lomonosov, was connected to the grid at the end of last year. In the US, just earlier this month, the NuScale design completed the US NRC design certification process, which is a first of a kind. So we have a lot of progress with these SMRs potentially coming to the market. And then in addition, the non-LWR SMRs are really catching up to the LWRs as well. So we should be able to see a whole new fleet of non-LWR SMRs in potentially the next decade. As we have, several technologies going through the licensing process in Canada, through the vendor design review process, as well as a number of utilities in Canada that have signed initial agreements with vendors for these generation 4 technologies. We have, as an example, several designs in Russia going through licensing. So, you know, there are a whole new host of designs that we may be able to see. And all of that presents a significant possibilities for growth of nuclear new build in markets that are different from the traditional ones. So if we look at power markets, you know, SMRs can address a whole new set of markets, both geographically, because you know, they can be used and deployed in countries which have smaller grids or which require distributed energy, or countries that don't have the financial capacity to support a large nuclear power plant. But also, these designs open a whole new market for non-electric applications in the short term, you know, desalination, for example, or process heat or district heat, and in the longer term, you know, production of alternative fuels, for example, like hydrogen. What impact is that going to have on the supply chain? I think that's going to be very interesting. You know, by the nature, SMRs, of course, are more modular, and they're going to have more manufactured content and potentially less civil construction. So here we're moving more towards a product rather than a project. And I think that that will both you know, increase the supply chain, especially with new companies coming in, kind of new blood, as well as change the nature of the market. So that will be very interesting to see with SMRs.
Thanks, Elina. You identified, yeah, a lot of opportunities in this new market. Also, maybe someone want to add a further point on the nuclear, on the small modular reactor. Leonid, maybe as we have seen with Elina, your company is quite involved in the market. So I don't know if you want to add something on this.
Sure, thank you, Laurent. Well, first of all, I would like to thank WNA for the great report that they have done. And obviously with the development of new technologies, small modular reactors as an example, I think this report will evolve in the years to come. I fully agree with Elina that with introduction of small modular reactors as the final product, the supply chain will greatly evolve. I think that besides the fact that small modular reactors will require more equipment and less construction, the other driving factor will be the amount and quantity of information and communication technologies and tools that will be used to manufacture and operate these reactors. I think that development times as well will greatly shorten, and well, we all hope that we will see something like a revolution in the way these components and reactors themselves will be built. Maybe something like the revolution that has happened in the few past years in the field of space vehicle launch and electric cars. 10 years ago it was a dream, today it's a reality. And well, the next thing is obviously the increase in the quantity of suppliers. I think that development of new technologies will bring those companies which are now developing advanced manufacturing tools and techniques. Non-conventional manufacturing technologies will probably dominate on this market, which will bring new suppliers and new challenges. First of all, related to quality assurance and licensing of manufacturing technologies and products used for SMM. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Leonid. Maybe let's go to the next questions. We just saw that there are a lot of opportunities with the new generation of reactors. Maybe a question for Oliver. The supply chain report reviews a number of opportunities and challenges facing the nuclear supply chain. What, in your opinion, are most prominent challenges today? Is it quality control? eliminating the risk of counterfeits and fraud, or the cost of equipment?
Yeah, as pointed out in your supply chain report, I think the greatest challenge is the decreasing number of suppliers that are in possession of a nuclear quality assurance program. This is a problem not in all parts of the world, but in certain parts of the world. I mean, in order to be eligible to produce safety-related SSCs for nuclear facilities, suppliers need to have a nuclear quality assurance program. And to get the corresponding accreditation to do so, it costs quite some efforts for the supplier to get it and also to maintain it. And I think suppliers will only take these efforts if they expect a good market prospect in the future, meaning a steady stream of orders in the years to come. And if you look at countries which have a lot of new build and operating large fleet of reactors at the same time, like China, Russia, or India, I mean, this prospect is definitely there, and there you don't have let's say, really problem of having sufficient number of suppliers with quality assurance programs. In Europe, I mean, if you look at like a country like France, which operates a large fleet of standardized reactors, I think that's very attractive for suppliers too, actually, to make business with EDF and to maintain their nuclear quality assurance program. Yeah. But where this market prospect is missing, there we see from our own work that it gets increasingly challenging for, let's say, for utilities to find suppliers which are willing to keep their nuclear quality assurance program. And from our own work, we looked into Europe in particular in those countries with utilities which are operating small fleets of reactors. Here they are the most vulnerable and have the most difficulties actually to keep their suppliers or to attract new suppliers to their industry there. Yeah. Okay, there's a little bit of, let's say, relief or let's say solutions around it. One solution that was already mentioned in the report and also in the presentation by Greg is to make more use of commercial grade items, to do commercial grade dedication and use more non-nuclear standard industry equipment and components. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Olivier. Does anyone want to add further explanation to what was just said?
Yeah, this is Jonathan. Can you hear me? I had to change my audio.
Yeah, we can hear you, Jonathan.
Okay, good. Yeah, I agree with everything Oliver just said. I think the challenges to the supply chain are myriad because we have had some, reduction overall in the market over the last decade, and obviously shifting of that market to regions that now are managing their own supply chains much more aggressively. Obviously China, but India, South Korea. And so I think integrating new suppliers from those markets where there is domestic, a larger domestic capability into the international global market is going to be an interesting transition that we have to undergo, because I think you're not going to see all the same suppliers from Europe, North America always able to meet the demands. And so I think you're starting to see some exports out of China. Korea, of course, has been an exporter as well for a while, but expanding that, Japan certainly too. But now we also unfortunately have a number of trade issues. U.S.-China trade war is probably the biggest, but China-European relations are starting to get a little difficult, obviously. So you don't want to create supply chains that are sort of bubbles in themselves. I think the international nuclear industry is not big enough to have various spheres that are completely separate from each other. And so I think the industry as a whole is going to have to work harder to integrate globally more, because really, if a supply chain is weak in any part of the world, that probably will have problems for the entire industry globally.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for these explanations. And if we go maybe more in details, Leonid, several reactors vendors are looking at improving the way quality is managed in the supply chain. So can you maybe elaborate what vendors are doing as an illustration?
Sure, of course. Well, we don't see any decrease in the number of suppliers for nuclear industry on our domestic market. And I can't say that we face a problem of decreased number of quality assurance programs and suppliers that are able to supply the nuclear industry here in Russia. However, if we talk about the global market, well, the greatest factor in this year obviously was the coronavirus infection, which had put virtual stop to all activities related to on-site product acceptance and on-site supplier evaluation. So to tackle that specific problem, we had to adopt new approaches, new technologies. We tried and successfully implemented several techniques aimed at remote evaluation. And we did have several cases when remotely we accepted products on manufacturing sites. Obviously, I see that new kinds of suppliers will shortly come in the industry. For example, I believe that tools like remote evaluation of construction activities on site using satellites, drones, and appropriate software techniques will be largely adopted on construction sites for nuclear, as they are currently adopted on construction sites for oil and gas industries. I think that we didn't see any specific problems related to quality of components or quality of construction works on site, even given limitations that we had with coronavirus. I don't think I can give you any other good ideas on that subject so far.
Thanks already. Some good example, Leonid. Thanks. Maybe Martin, because you were mentioning the fact that you work also on the commercial grade program, and that the use of commercial grade program might be a way also to improve quality. Can you eventually share some approach that you have identified or be as a witness in different vendors?
Yeah, okay. Okay, reactor vendors. I think there are two things. I mean, you just mentioned commercial grade dedication there. I mean, we found out from our own work that commercial grade dedication is indeed, let's say, a solution for utilities that are facing the problem of finding new suppliers there. I mean, we found out in our studies, actually, there's one country in Europe, this is Slovenia, which only runs one nuclear power plant, actually, that they're actually not facing these supply chain issues as other countries. So what is Slovenia making differently than the other countries? Well, Slovenia, let's say NEK, the Slovenian utility, they have aligned themselves very closely to the US nuclear industry. So they are really benefiting really from all the solutions, working groups, initiatives, supply chain initiatives in the US, and can adopt their solutions there. Yeah. So Slovenia has since 1995 a commercial grade dedication procedure in place, which they seem to use quite frequently. So, and I think this can also give a good example and a solution to other countries in Europe, like Sweden and in Finland and the Czech Republic, where, let's say, whose utilities at the moment are really in the process of implementing commercial grade dedication processes themselves. Yeah. So this, having said this about a commercial grade dedication, now about the reactor vendors there, I think it would be very important that that uniform quality management standards are used all the way down in the supply chain. I mean, in the World Nuclear Association Supply Chain Outlook report, it was already mentioned the ISO 19443. And I think this is actually really key that all the suppliers actually really use this standard. And what else reactor vendors can actually do? I mean, we now have a number of reactor vendors now designing small modular reactors, and my plea and wish to them would be that they do not invent, let's say, new codes and standards, new nuclear design codes just for SMRs, but really use what is already there, because I think they make their lives much easier, lives easier of suppliers, and also lives easier of regulators who in the end need to approve all these designs. Yeah. So for the water-cooled SMRs, really to stick to ASME, to RCCM, and all the nuclear design codes which are already there. And if you, let's say, go further in the future, maybe with regards to generation 4, when we have maybe more non-water-cooled reactor designs, there at the moment we only have a very limited number of nuclear design codes, and maybe it could be worth thinking that countries and reactor vendors jointly develop these design codes. Just to give an example, I mean, India is at the moment building a sodium-cooled fast reactor in Kalpakam, and they're using the RCC-MRX for the mechanical components of their sodium-cooled fast reactor, so a French nuclear design code. And I think that could be, let's say, a way forward into the future.
Thanks. Thanks, Oliver. So mutualization, standardizations might be part of this improvement of quality in order to have a global approach and not to in fact, force the company to have different standard and way of producing. So what you are saying is definitely that we need to go to a similar standards to benefit also from a globalized approach. Thanks a lot. Another question maybe for Pekka. The International Atomic Energy Agency is an international organization working with governments to promote the peaceful use of atomic energy. What are the agency's priorities in respect to the supply chain? Is the agency, for example, helping to build the capacity of government to develop the nuclear supply chain in the country that want to embark a nuclear energy program?
Laurent-Olivier, thank you very much for the question. How many hours do I have? No, sincerely, you know, I first want to congratulate the WNA for this fantastic Outlook 2040 that very much shows similar projections as the agency's outlook with regard to the nuclear generation going to 2050. First of all, we need to understand really what the International Atomic Energy Agency is, and it serves as the world's central intergovernmental forum for scientific and technical cooperation in the nuclear field. It's an autonomous agency of the United Nations, having 172 member states this year. And the member states agree on the priorities of the agency. This is the first thing. Well, Well, what are the fundamental things that the agency is doing? Well, Atoms for Peace and Development, so it means maximizing the contribution of nuclear technology to the world while verifying its peaceful use. This is the often heard statement of the agency mission. We are responsible for the agency safety standards. First is the safety fundamentals, SF1. And for instance, having to do with the supply chain, we have the leadership and management for safety, general safety requirements, part 2 and its requirement 11, in fact, which talks so much about customer responsibilities. This very much oblige the agency in its work, the safety standards. And in practice, the member states seek to harmonize their frameworks that to the agency to the extent reasonable. But there is more than, it's not only safety standards. There are fundamental and practical guidance like the nuclear energy basic principles, which is, for instance, adding to the safety, the benefits, transparency, long-term commitment, and efficient use of resources and continual improvement, so that the benefits of the nuclear energy would come true. This means that the prime objective of nuclear power plants is to generate nuclear energy safely and sustainably. And supply chain is a critical factor in making the nuclear energy sustainable. I think that we all agree on that. The opposite case also, in case of the failure, is true. So we cannot really operate without a sustainable supply chain. More about setting the priorities to the agency is that the agency general conference and its resolutions, and by the way, we now have a hybrid general conference going on, very virtual in fact. For the nuclear energy, it's the Standing Advisory Group for Nuclear Energy that has underlined the importance of the supply chain. Furthermore, the Technical Working Group for Nuclear Power Plant Operations, just recently, and there are several plant managers represented, it ranked supply chain as the most important topic for the operating MPPs on which the IAEA should work on. So the agency NE has issued practical guidance in the area of management of the supply chain and procurement in line with all this. MPT 321 in 2016, which is the Procurement Engineering Supply Chain Guidelines in support of operation and maintenance of nuclear facilities, and shortly thereafter managing counterfeit and fraudulent items in the nuclear industry. We just recently issued TechDoc 1910 on quality assurance and quality control in nuclear facilities and activities. And this brought these terms back to the agency literature. Many people would say it was about the time. So the practical guidance is targeted both to operating and newcomer member states of the agency. The aim is really to spread word about the areas of importance, good practices, lessons learned applicable to all parties, not only to the governments, and for the member states to become better informed customers and suppliers, all the organizations. I would separately still mention the special PUI, Peaceful Uses Initiative extra budgetary funding that has made it possible to develop virtual web-based toolkits for the member states on supply chain management, and a separate one on regulation standards in the field of management and quality requirements. They are or will be soon operational. The agency is equally developing 2 documents on the acceptance process to use commercial grade items. We heard Oliver to mention them in safety related system of the MPPs, and the one on the digital INC equipment should appear shortly. So stay tuned. This is all done in line with the detailed recommendations received from the Technical Working Group of the Nuclear Power Operations. So just stay tuned or contact me to learn more. LinkedIn, by the way, works as well, very well. We organize training courses on supply chain and procurement management. COVID has delayed this slightly, but next year, May, we are planning one with EPRI in Charlotte, and also with Rosatom, we have good cooperation, and we are planning training courses, and we seek to virtualize them and use webinars as tools for that. Speaking of the webinars, in July 2020, we organized a webinar on COVID and its impact on the nuclear supply chain. Well, just type these themes and watch the recording through the YouTube. It's available there. So these contents are available for both operating and newcomer member states equally. Both require zippers, and the challenges are partly the same, partly different. For example, the new generation of people coming to the nuclear field is the same challenge. And especially for the newcomers, both governmental and private organizations, there is e-learning material and training courses especially directed for them, and our nuclear infrastructure development section helps to overcome challenges on their journey towards sustainable nuclear energy production. The principle for the agency is the same. Through learning and assistance to make the member states to understand their situation, present challenges and potential solutions, and to help them to find out what would suit them the best. So congratulations on this fantastic report, WNA again. And if there are any other questions, I'm ready to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Pekka. And so your guidance, your guidelines for the industrialization and supply chain development are always a reference in newcomer countries, how to address the involvement of the local supply chain. So we see that you continue to embark companies and countries also with webinar and training that's in this situation. So that's good. Thanks a lot. Does anyone want to make a further point on this topic, how to embark in the countries and capacities?
Laurent-Olivier, I will, if you don't mind. I think Pekka did a fantastic job of covering the first part of your question, which was around promoting information to governments to enable them to develop. I think the second area is probably around when those governments start to develop and the localization that comes in. There are clearly two basic different types of nuclear power plant in the modern day, in terms of there's a large one or there's an SMR one, and they've got similar and different challenges. But when it comes to developing the supply chain, there's the supply chain for the operational part, there's the supply chain for the building part, there's the supply chain for the maintenance part. And I think that countries need to be very careful in how they structure the way that they localize those elements, because there are some elements that it's clearly better that there's a smaller number of them, it's better to make them in one place, but then you've got the challenges of transport, you've got the challenges of moving things from one place to another and the impact on carbon footprint. And you've also got problems around financing when it comes to expecting a government to effectively subsidize another country's production. And so there needs to be a balance drawn there. But in addition to that, the localization is one where if we can do it in a structured way so that neighboring countries, keeping supply chains as short as possible, can be developed to support each other mutually with the way in which they move forward, taking advantage of standardizing of codes, of using as many non-specialized pieces of equipment as possible around the standardization and the use of standard equipment, then the focus then goes more on the surety of the supply chain, the confidence with regard to the quality that comes out of that supply chain. And in all of those things, the overall guidance, as you've said, and as Pekka said, is important from the IAEA to give it the baseline that goes there. And I think the next thing to come from it is to make sure that consideration is given to cooperation between these different localized programs, because unless you're going to do a French or a US approach of having many plants of standardized design, then you're going to have a problem of running out of things to sell for your supply chain to sell to, unless it's able to be scaled or used mutually. So I think that there are many challenges in the question you asked, and I think we're getting a lot of thinking around it and moving towards answering some of them.
Thanks a lot, Simon. And yes, in terms of local industrialization or localization program, I think definitely it's also, as you said, in part, it's a balance, in fact, between financing, between quality, and also project schedule. It has to be considered each time that you want to develop and introduce new company, and also being able to ensure the quality and the expectations that are existing to build the nuclear power plant. Thanks to all of you for discussion. It's maybe time to take some questions, and maybe Greg, can you consider some of the questions that we will have to be answered by the panel?
Yes, we've got some very good questions. I will actually answer one or two of them straight away, because they are questions, you know, is this covered in the report type questions? So we have a question from Professor Jeffrey Rothwell from Stanford University. What about radioactive waste management capital investment? The answer to that is yes, there is some discussion of waste management in the report, and the projects that are suggested that are being proposed are mentioned, some of those are projects, but it's not gone into a great deal on that score, and I think Jeffrey Rothwell is an expert anyway in this area, and probably has his own ideas on this one. I hope that answers your question, Jeffrey. Also, Sharifa Noor from Malaysia is asking, what is the estimate of nuclear expenditure based upon? She directed this, I think, to Jonathan, but I think the estimates in my, well, in the World Nuclear Association report are based on the projects that have been suggested at one time or another by utilities or by reactor developers, and in terms of countries' own ideas of what they're planning to do. So that upper scenario expects the full implementation of many of those projects. We know in reality that might not happen, and that's why the reference scenario is a bit lower than that, than the upper scenario. But those scenarios are based on what we know is proposed in terms of nuclear reactors. So that's what the capital expenditure is based upon. And then we have a question from Tariq Maidyat from Jordan Atomic Energy Authority concerning nuclear grade graphite. Does the report address the scarcity of graphite? And well, yes, it is mentioned in the report, but here again, we don't have a solution to the potential scarcity of graphite, but I mean, it is one of those resources that there is some scarcity attached to. Okay, so we would like to ask a question to the panel from Brandon Munro. Given the recent experience in conventional reactor construction, where multiple vendors have built a small number of first-of-a-kind reactors, with the exception of Rosatom, do you think the large number of potential small modular reactor vendors will be an impediment to the adoption of new technologies? So do you think that there's some sort of crowding out possible here? I don't know who would want to try and answer that. From Brandon Munro of Bannerman Resources.
I'll be happy to just at least start answering this, Greg. I think there's recognition in the industry of exactly this issue, and attempt to adopt some lessons learned from the adoption and deployment of Generation 3+ designs, in that a lot of these vendors are looking to pursue demonstration projects. So in the US, for example, you have an entire program that's been funded by the US government, Department of Energy, called ARDP, Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. And it seeks to address this issue, to actually demonstrate these designs and demonstrate designs that are close to commercial applications in order to avoid some of the first of a kind issues. So hopefully with these demonstration projects, you will have a number of designs. I don't think that all of the designs that we're seeing today, given that there are dozens of them, will necessarily be successful, but I do think the ones that can go through this initial demonstration and do so successfully, will have the chance to be deployed.
Thanks, Elena. Does anyone want to add something to this?
Yes, Laurent, if I may.
Yes, please, Leonid.
Well, I don't think that anyone knows how many vendors of small modular reactors will we have. I think that the most important question about the supply chain for this prospective new product is whether it's going to be a customer market where big vendors will create these supply chains, nurture them, and develop them. Or will it be supplier market where suppliers will muster key technologies for components for small modular reactors, thus imposing these technologies on vendors? We don't know how this product will work, and we don't know how the market will be. But I see this challenge and this kind of fork emerging within the next 10 to 15 years, depending on who will be the first one to master the manufacturing technology for components. Because small modular reactors, as my colleagues have already said, are not about construction, they're not about project management. They are about licensing, technology approval, manufacturing of components, and information technologies that will allow to run them in automatic or semi-automatic mode.
Thanks, Leonid. Greg, do we have some further questions to the panel?
Well, I think we need to ask a question really in the light of our current health emergency. I mean, perhaps the panelists could explain a little bit about how or whether the COVID-19 situation has affected the nuclear industry and affected the supply chain. Do we have any good evidence of what is going on in that respect?
Maybe here, Pekka from Vienna, from the agency. I could just quickly tell about the outcome of our information collection that was reported already in July during the webinar. So first of all, shutdowns for health problems have not been seen in some cases because of the electricity demand has been lower. What comes to the supply chain itself, it has been first the mobility of the special skill set workers that has affected outages. However, the operators have been very, very flexible and nimble in handling the outages, sometimes by prolonging the duration, sometimes by just with a smaller scope. But we haven't seen it everything. I think that we still need to see during the coming winter and next year, if this pandemic persists and drags, what will happen with those projects that have been postponed? What will happen in case that the manufacturing of certain critical spares has been stalled? So I don't think that we have seen all the implications of the COVID yet, but we just have to be tuned. And yes, we plan to renew the same webinar in the future as well. Thank you, Laurent-Olivier.
Thanks a lot, Pekka. One question, so to the panel, for Simon, Elena. because we addressed already different topics, but maybe one to tackle that is mentioned in the report also, this is financial aspect. So the nuclear energy is regarded as a risky proposition in financial terms, especially in the current specific economy and conditions. So, but the supply chain report points out some investors have not been put off, including private equity companies. So are you seeing a change of mind in the financial community towards nuclear? Simon, maybe, if you would like to start.
Okay, right. Are we seeing a change of heart? I don't think we're seeing a change of heart, because I don't think the heart ever really went out of it. I think we're seeing maybe a change of thought process and a change of emphasis. So, you know, with any kind of investment there, as you've identified, it's a risky proposition. Well, with any kind of investment, there's risk, but risk is relative. So with nuclear power, you know, there are rewards and there are risks. And I think with the change in both the global expectation or desire in some geographies of consumers that they can always have power, with the shift to low carbon and the desire to have low carbon electric vehicles, to have a reduction in the use of fossil fuels for heating, and to look for alternative fuel sources, I think that the investment in nuclear, which has always been a long-term investment, there are seen to be some not short-term, but nearer-term gains or more immediate gains. And the bit that probably slows it all down is all the horror stories we hear of overrun projects and spiraling costs. Well, again, we've got two different thoughts on the technology in terms of either large plants or small modular plants. They would be different funding models. You've got the difference in if you can provide multiple of the same design, then the cost or the risk associated with the project, and therefore the risk associated with the financing, starts to change. So I think the mix and the scalability from SMRs to large plants remains attractive from a financing point of view. You know, the longer term issues around recycling, we're starting to see some, you know, recycling issues associated with things like, for example, wind turbine blades, which aren't particularly easy to recycle. You know, whereas with regard to nuclear, there are solutions from the existing fleet and the existing operators that, whilst they are very long term, are nonetheless recycling solutions that are available. So in summary, from my thoughts anyway, the opportunities for investment and the willingness of investors to invest increase with certainty and with integrity within the supply chain.
Thanks, Simon. Elina, would you maybe add further point to this?
Absolutely. Thanks, Laurent-Olivier. You know, I would actually disagree with the statement that nuclear energy is a risky proposition. We have to separate risk during construction of new nuclear built plants, especially first of a kind, from risk of investment into the existing supply chain. As far as the existing supply chain, we actually get a pretty unique perspective on this as a law firm. So we get to work on investment transactions before they're public, and we get to have some insights into who the bidders are. And I can tell you just from our personal experience, I've never seen and worked on as many M&A transactions in the nuclear space as I have in the past 3 years. So I think this represents, you know, looking at as one example, you know, the Brookfield purchase of Westinghouse. Brookfield Capital Partners is a private equity firm based in Canada that is, you know, very active in the energy sector, in particular with renewables, and this was their first nuclear transaction. And in addition to that, during the bidding process, there were quite a few bids from other private equity and non-traditional investors. So I think this represents an increasing recognition from investors, both traditional companies with some ties to the industry and new investors like private equity, that the global nuclear market, the existing market for reactors, for equipment, for fuel, is robust, is reliable, and it presents great long-term gains. I think when looking at new technologies, there's also, we're talking about more risky investments. There's also increasing interest in investments in SMRs, advanced reactors, as well as advanced fuels, companies pursuing new fuel technologies. So we're seeing in that space, increasing investments from venture capital, angel investors, and other non-traditional investors in companies developing these technologies. So, just to summarize, I think, yes, there's still reluctance from the financial community to support new large nuclear infrastructure projects. But when it comes to existing companies, as well as some innovative companies that have a significant potential in the market, we do see great interest from investors.
Thanks, Elina. Thanks, Simon, for this clear answer. And we are through now our launching event. So I would like definitely to thank the panel discussants. So Simon, Jonathan, Leonid, Oliver, Pekka, Elina, and especially Greg. So thanks to all of you for all your valuable answer. I hope that you definitely found this event instructive and useful. You have a good highlights about all the topics that the WNA supply chain report is addressing. So please feel free to go on the website. You will find the report on it. So thanks also for attending today, to all of you asking questions, and we definitely will have further opportunities to continue to work together. And I hope that we will be all together next year in London for the next WNA working group, supply chain, and also the convention. So thanks to everyone, keep safe, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.